Dems, there's this constant debate happening. Like, are they going to put the woke away? This is a phrase you hear. Like, are they going to put the woke away and finally realize to like dial it back? And that's why they're losing elections. But here's John Oliver talking about how, trans kids should be able to play girls' sports.
Ads on that one issue. And it was frustrating to see the Harris campaign fail to formulate a response, especially because it's pretty easy to do. Watch, I'll do it for you right now. As we've discussed before, there are vanishingly few trans girls competing in high schools anywhere. Even if there were more, trans kids, like all kids, vary in athletic ability, and there is no evidence they pose any threat to safety or fairness. It is very weird for you to be so focused on this subject. And finally, if you genuinely want to address the biggest concern for most girls who play high school sports, you'd be less worried about this and more about the creepy assistant volleyball coach who keeps liking their posts on fucking Instagram.
So there's a few things here. He's like, there's vanishingly few, and if we accept that as true, it doesn't matter. It's like saying, why do you care about school shootings? They hardly ever happen. You know what I mean? So that's not a garbage argument. That's not a good argument. If something is wrong, it doesn't have to be happening at a large scale for you to be against it. You just are against it because it's wrong. Then the second thing he says, and this is the most like shocking one, he's like, there's no evidence that they have a advantage or that they pose a risk to fairness or safety. Both of those are bullshit. Evidence, peer-reviewed scientific journalistic evidence, and there's a lot more evidence just about the performance advantage that they have. But this weasel thing they do where they say fairness, and Oliver even mentions how like, of course, people vary in their athletic abilities. And I made a video to address this thing. You have to understand how to argue against this, right? So I made a video called The Philosophy of Fairness. And essentially what you have to do is determine what would make something unfair. Because what they'll say is like, oh, well, if you're tall, you have an advantage in volleyball and basketball, but we don't ban tall people from playing volleyball and basketball because it's unfair. And that's true. But what would make something unfair? That's the question. And most people don't have an answer to that because they've never given it any thought. But I have. And the answer is quite simple, actually. What makes something unfair is if it's against the rules. That's it, right? So in the same way that you wouldn't have an adult go compete in a teenager's soccer league, because that would be against the rules as defined by the very identity of the league. You can't have males competing against females in a woman's league, right? And if you don't agree with that, then you should also, another question you could ask somebody like this is like, well, what if I wanted to take steroids? Yeah, boxing has weight classes, but those weight classes define the rules. You have to be within this weight. And so if somebody is not in the weight class, then it would be unfair especially if they're over, right? It would be unfair to allow them to compete because it would be against the rules. The argument they use for trans athletes could apply to steroids, right? Oh, well, people already have different abilities. So who cares what your biological sex and physiology is? And you can say, well, people have different abilities, so who cares if you do steroids, There has to be rules, and the rules have to be followed. Otherwise, it's unfair. It's as simple as that. John Oliver wasn't the only one doing that. Jen Psaki gave a similar thing. I haven't actually watched this, but from what I understand, it's very similar. Let's check it out.
There's obviously a lot of soul searching right now going on within the Democratic Party, and that's a good thing. But what I worry about is that in the course of all that soul searching, some Democrats might reach the wrong sweeping conclusions. And there are a lot of issues that fall into that bucket. But one in particular that stuck out to me is transgender rights. Republicans spent hundreds of millions of dollars on anti-trans ads this election cycle, including one that showed Vice President Harris talking about government funding for gender reaffirming care for prisoners and detainees. If that sounds like a particularly obscure issue, it is, because it applies to a tiny group of people. And it's also a policy that
I don't care if it's never happened in the history of humanity. If that's on the books as an option, if that's on the table, that my tax dollars are going to pay for some man to get breast implants in prison, And I'm going to like, no, it's a no from me. That's insane policy. That should not be on the table, full stop.
By the way, was in place during the first Trump presidency. Another one of the lines that ran over and over again in those ads and throughout right-wing media is this idea that America is faced with a crisis of boys playing in girls' sports. Now, these ads created this perception that the issues of trans kids playing sports was dominating schools across the country, which is completely false. Some people got pulled into that argument. I mean, immediately after the election, Congressman Seth Moulton.
It's not across the country. It's just in certain specific locales where this has been happening. Fact checked. You just got fact checked. It's not across the country, bigot. It's just in a few places where this totally unfair thing is happening.
Told the New York Times that, quote, Democrats spend way too much time trying not to offend anyone rather than being brutally honest about.
Over 600 girls' sports records have been set by boys in high school over the past 4 years per Daily Wire. Yeah, I don't know if that is true, but I'll accept it as true and also as proof that Jen Psaki is stupid.
About the challenges many Americans face. I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that. And then last weekend, Congressman Moulton came on this network to discuss those comments.
I was just speaking authentically as a dad about one of many issues where I think we're just out of touch with the majority of voters. And I stand by my position. You know, maybe I didn't get all the words exactly right. But the point is that the backlash I've received proves my point that we can't even have these discussions as a party.
Look, reflection is good. But if that were actually an issue at thousands of schools across the country, it would be worthy of a debate. But there are just incredibly few examples.
It's, again, imagine applying this logic to school shootings. Jen, we've had like 1 school shooting per year. Who cares? It's vanishingly small amounts
Of transgender girls.
And if you said that to somebody like Jen, she'd be like, well, yeah, but you're talking about people dying. We're talking about, you know, winning competitions. And it's like, okay, yeah, it's not as bad, but it's still wrong. It doesn't matter. If it's wrong, you just are against it on principle. It doesn't matter how bad it is or how often it's happening. It's wrong.
Playing in youth sports. And when we see those examples, there isn't evidence that these kids are a threat to safety or fairness.
Do they all get their talking points like handed down to no evidence that there's a threat to safety or fairness? Again, if you ask Jen Psaki to like define what would cause something to be unfair, and I don't mean give an example like, oh, well, a 500-pound man boxing a 8-year-old girl would be unfair. No. What is the actual metric that we can use that we can apply to any situation, right? A definition of fairness. They won't be able to give it to you. And there is tons of evidence. I debated Bosch about this like 5 years ago. This was one of the topics that came up in the debate. He gave me a total bullshit study, which I then immediately did a video debunking, showing why his study didn't show what it claimed to show, that there was no performance advantage, and also going on to show a whole bunch of studies that did find the performance advantage, and there's been more since then. There's like a dozen studies out there about how trans women, you know, trans identified males are stronger and faster and taller and better at sports than actual women or girls. So there is evidence. This one right here. Just put this on repeat for the next several years. The compromise: ditch the woke stuff, but run FDR Bernie style populist campaigns on economy, right? So this is how the Democrats can get back into fighting form. Ditch the woke stuff, but run FDR Bernie style populist campaigns on economy. There is still a great need for racial and gender equality. If that's what you are trying to abandon, you are not going to achieve equality in any sense. Definitely not advocating any abandonment of those principles. No, I mean the woke stuff, not the feminism and the gay race-based communism, whatever they call it. I just meant the woke part. Hey, what up, family? I'm a ding dong. It is I, your boy LP, and the clip you just watched is from my live stream show, The Daily Cope, which I do 4 to 5 times a week on Rumble, Odyssey, and my other YouTube channel. I will link all of them below if you want to check it out. And thanks for watching. Hope you're having a great day, and I will catch you on the flip side. Peace out.